They could have gotten new cars and other things, but they gave up all those things to live into the vision that they believe God had given them. I can follow someone like that.
In the late 1970s, a group of Calvin College alumni were deeply moved by the love of Jesus.
We heard about some communities that were living like second chapter of Acts and that were selling their expensive homes and moving into under-resourced neighborhoods and living together, sharing their money, and it just sounded so much like the way of Jesus that we had to visit, and once we visited and we saw the power of it, we wanted to live in community also, so we asked our friends if they wanted to like move in together and share our possessions and, you know, live like second chapter of Acts, and most of them said, no way, but, you know, 4 of us said yes.
They started the community of Living Waters. They had a men's house and a woman's house, and they were taking people in that were really struggling in life and ministering to them on a daily basis.
We were very idealistic. We just thought, okay, you know, these were the years of Jesus people, you know, the California coast, and they're just, you know, witnessing to people and people are becoming Christians. So we did that too. We set up microphones by the local gas station, and our singing group would just start singing songs, worship songs, then they'd share testimonies to the crowd that gathered, just like Jesus people in California, but, you know, without the results, you know, so, you know, didn't seem like anything was really happening from that. And we did a lot of other things. We had a used clothing store. We had a third world industries store. We started a story hour.
We would drive through this neighborhood.
We would drive through this neighborhood, the Roosevelt Park neighborhood. And I remember one particular Sunday riding through here, and John just said, we were stopped at a traffic light, he said, this is going to be the New Jerusalem. And I really think at that time that was a prophetic voice.
And we prayed about where we could live in the city and make a difference. And we felt that the Lord was leading us to move into the Granville Avenue area.
We had like 7 of us. We bought 2 homes on Stope. We bought one on London. And the idea was that we're going to minister to the adults in the neighborhood.
Basically, it wasn't until somebody in our group said, why don't we just invite our neighbors over for supper and sing some songs. And so the girls in our group went up and down the street to Rodriguez's, Ortiz's, Soto's, Crow's, Lopez's, knocked on the door. You want to come over and sing some songs on Sunday and eat some food? And they actually said yes.
Because we were playing music, we had 2 people playing guitar. And so the kids in the neighborhood, they're actually on our porch. They're pushing against the screen door, they're looking inside, and they're really kind of, what's going on in there?
Until finally we just said, hey, these kids have got to have their own special night, you know. So Tuesday night became a night called Kid Power. It was dubbed by one of the kids. And originally we had Kid Power right in our house.
They started gathering themselves, simply feeding and doing Bible study with children in the neighborhood who parents didn't have high-class jobs, didn't have the money.
We would have this rotation of food, these good Dutch casseroles, probably tuna fish casserole or maybe boiled hot dogs or spaghetti noodles with Prego sauce. One of the things for that was we saw kids just going to the party store, getting a bag of chips and Coke, and that was their supper. So we knew we had to kind of meet some physical and nutritional needs as well as spiritual needs. And the kids kept coming. And they kept coming in droves, and so we would drive through the neighborhood with 2 vans and pick up kids, and it got to the point where it's just, we were overwhelmed.
Pretty soon there were 75 kids coming to the house that I live in. We're using every room in the house to teach lessons, to feed, to sing, and whatever. Then 2 houses, 3 houses.
And eventually we bought an office building on Granville Avenue. So we used the patients' rooms for classrooms, and that was Kid Power.
The local school was ranked 3rd lowest in the state of Michigan. We just felt like, we love these Kid Power kids. They have a lot of academic needs and social needs and spiritual needs. Way too much to meet in 2 hours a week.
I think it was 1980.
We were in the parking lot of Granville Avenue Church.
We met Reverend Pontier, who said,
I think it's time for you to start a school. And at first they said,
no. In fact, we just laughed. And he said, I think it's God's timing for you to start a school. Even though we laughed at first, we started praying about it, and we just began to think like, yeah, we could have a school for kids from the neighborhood, a very small school. We'd throw out all the textbooks, we'd make all the materials ourselves, we would teach them to read from stories that they dictated about their own lives. It would be centered on Jesus, it'd be open to everybody. Tuition would be based on income, because we knew their income wasn't much. We knew there wasn't going to be much to actually support the teachers, and so the other part of our great plan was that the teachers would work for free.
We've been involved with Kid Power. We had all these kids coming. We saw their great need. They could have a quality education, a Christ-centered education.
They came to me one time, and all three of them, I knew something was going to happen, and it was. They decided that they were going to start a school.
And we thought, well, we can handle that financially. Nellene could move into our house and we could support her so she could teach for free. The guys could support Mark and so he could teach for free, and we could meet the needs of these kids.
When I started teaching here, and Nellene did, we did not take an income. We were living in community like the second chapter of Acts. So we had people working at the bank down here on Granville Avenue. We had people working at Pine Rest. We had someone teaching at Grand Rapids Public Schools. One was a professor at Calvin. So all those incomes together, we shared that together. And that allowed us to get this school off the ground without paying the teachers.
All summer long, we just couldn't find a building to actually have it in.
We were really struggling with finding a building for the school. This was going on just 1 month before the school was to open. We had students enrolled. We still didn't have a building.
And the kids would ask us, are we still going to have the school? We said, yep, we just don't know where it's going to be. The church had already said that we could use the church basement, but the fire marshal had said no. And so summer basically was almost over, and we still didn't know where the school was going to be.
Friday before Labor Day weekend, school's supposed to start the day after, the fire marshal said that we could use the church for 1 year, but we had to fireproof the ceilings in the basement. So as a community, we all painted all the ceilings with fire retardant paint. The church said we could use the basement as long as their seniors could continue using their shuffleboard court in the basement every Tuesday morning. So that meant that every Monday night we had to move Mark's classroom aside, and then we'd have to put Mark's classroom all back together again.
So that's when we did some serious looking, and we were coming up empty-handed.
And then finally we had to look at the building that we're in for the elementary, which was right behind the church. And we didn't want it for so many different reasons. One was that it was mammoth. It had 19 classrooms, and we had only 19 kids.
What are you gonna do, put one kid in each room? You know, so it was almost ridiculous, but at the same time we thought, okay, you know what? We're going to step out in faith.
We felt at the time that it would be really too big, but the Lord had much bigger plans for the school than we had, and knew that we would need a building this size.
A group of us walked around this building.
We all, as a group, started to pray. Is this the direction that you want for us? Is this the new thing that you're calling us to?
And I remember God just speaking to me, and this does not happen often, but he spoke to me. He said, you are standing on holy ground. And I thought, you know what? This is it. This is where we have to be. We didn't have the money.
And they said, will you give us $120,000? And Ken said, yes, we will. And then they said, will you give us $40,000 down this month? And Ken said, yes, we will. And we just like, yes, we will. We didn't sign anything. We just got up and left. And we walked on the sidewalk. It was a July night and just looked at each other, just burst out laughing because we knew that we just committed ourselves to something we couldn't possibly do. You know, it took a year to get $3,000. How are we going to get $40,000 in the next couple of weeks?
So Miss D, she actually sat down with a group of local business leaders in the area.
She just told about the first year and the vision for what we could do with a Christ-centered education in Roosevelt Park.
At the end, they all wrote checks, and the checks added up to $45,000. So it was more than what we needed. And I think that's kind of the story of the school, is that God is always supplying more than what we needed. And I think just leaning in on God, we're going to find, he always surprises us.
I heard that from him, and I went over to Dr. Box and I said, they did it again, Kay, they did it again. And right away John says, and the Lord was with them, and that's why they were able to do it.
It was our defining miracle that showed us that money wasn't going to stand in the way of what God was going to do here, and that he would meet our needs, and he'd even go beyond that.
They came to me, and John said, I would like to work out a curriculum. So there they were, just as intense as could be. I said, well, if the two of you aren't going to be able to do that, you have to get some other teachers there.
The confidence that Betty Bosma and Catherine Block put in us, we can't underestimate how valuable that was, because We were pretty naive thinking that we could start this school, but with their help, their guidance, their leadership, they helped us navigate the early waters of where we're going with this school.
At that point, we knew we were going to be much bigger, and we slowly grew. We never dreamed of having middle school.
We had kids who were leaving 6th grade, but were they were out and tossed to the wind. You know, they were saying, you know, we can't find a school like this.
We went to the board and said, we really feel like we need a middle school. There was some hesitation, and one board member said, well, if we vote for this, we have to promise we'll never have a high school. And then about 6 years later, we just felt like same thing was happening with our 8th grade graduates, that they were getting to the schools, that some were getting into great schools and some couldn't, and most of it became clear because we had 9 kids in a charter experiment and it didn't work out, and the parents pulled them all out, and we had 9 9th graders at Potter's House in February, and we didn't have a 9th grade. And so we're just trying to teach them in our spare time, and then we're thinking like, maybe God's calling us to have a high school.
Good evening. As John mentioned, 4 years ago in 1998, we opened the doors to 20 9th graders and 11 10th graders. Now in our 4th year, those 31 students have grown into a high school, grades 9 through 12, of 140 students. And those 20 9th graders are now the senior class that you see standing before you, including the 5 young men who started in our school in kindergarten. It's my privilege to present to you the 2002 graduating class of the Potter's House Christian High School.
It's always been about what is the next generation going to look like, and how are we going to produce resilient followers of Jesus.
I grew up in a community of hopelessness, and Potter's House represents all the things that I was deprived of, and it gives it to this community.
There's 2 things that we've learned in our journey at Potter's House. One is dependence, and the other is expectation. So dependence, we've literally been dependent on God for 40 years, and even prior to that. But there's never been a time in our history where we didn't have to worry about the next payroll. It's always been by faith. And to be in that situation for 40 years and seeing all the ways that God comes through time after time in the most difficult situations is a huge faith builder. And the other part is expectation. We thought we were going to be this small school, volunteer teachers of 30 kids, and look what God's given us. This, 600 kids, a high school, an elementary. We now own the church and the parsonage.
All of us who struggle in some way need a lighthouse. We need something to point us. Potter's House has been that lighthouse.
There's this vision in the Bible of all different people coming together to just be one. And that's what we have here.